vinaendelea kuimarisha hali ya usalama nchini. Ndugu wananchi, ikumbukwe kuwa nchi yetu inaongozwa kwa misingi ya sheria ambayo lazima izingatiwe na kuheshimiwa. Kutokana na hali hiyo, Jeshi la Ulinzi la Wananchi wa Tanzania linawataka watu wote wanaojihusisha na vitendo vya kihalifu kuacha vitendo hivyo mara moja ili kuepusha madhara yasiyokuwa ya lazima kwa ustawi wa jamii na taifa letu. Endapo vitendo vya uhalifu vitaendelea, Jeshi la Ulinzi la Wananchi wa Tanzania kwa kushirikiana na vyombo vingine vya usalama vitaendelea kuchukua hatua stahiki kwa mujibu wa sheria.
That is Chief of Tanzanian People's Defence Force General Jacob John Mkunda akionya dhidi ya kuvunja sheria na kuwataka watu kuacha vitendo hivyo mara moja ili kuepusha madhara. He was speaking today after what we've witnessed in Tanzania, and we are honored tonight to have with us in studio Professor Peter Kagwanja, who is the CEO of the Africa Policy Institute, and more importantly, he's my teacher. Karibu, Prof.
Asante sana.
And we also have Roland Ebole, who's the regional researcher East Africa at Amnesty International. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me and joining the gang. I've never been invited to a gang.
Believe me, it's an honor. There are not many. Karibu sana, Prof. And of course, we have Sam and JB with us tonight. We're talking about Tanzania, and we're going to have Prof and Roland give us some perspective. But I think we need to start with you, Sam, to just paint a picture. I know elections happened yesterday, but we've seen unprecedented scenes. Chaos, moto mewashwa, internet shutdown, curfew, and a warning from the Chief of Defense Forces. Sam, what's going on next door?
You know, that is so difficult now, unbelievable, to answer that question. Yeah. For the simple reason that we're not getting as much access to information as you'd expect with African elections, and if you have to even speak about East African elections, for the simple reason, like what you just said, that internet access has been denied in Tanzania. I remember yesterday when I was speaking to an official from Chadema party itself, the international secretary, and I asked him the question, are you going home to vote? And he told me he is not going to vote because there's no election that has been organized in Tanzania. Whatever was happening was sham. Not even sham election, just sham. Those were his words. To an extent that now, even following media coverage of those events becomes very difficult. And when you find information coming from Tanzanian media outlets, then it's this sort of information you're getting from the general talking about a warning to the citizens and saying that whatever they are doing, they will be pursued following the legal means. So at a time, 2025, I remember in previous elections, we've actually sent a crew to Tanzania and even Uganda to cover elections, but this time it's been such a challenge. Of course, coming from the history that we've witnessed the past few months, weeks and months, to an extent that even Kenyans being detained in the neighboring country, but also the extent of Kenyans who have wanted to go to Tanzania to follow the cause of justice for some of the opposition figures in that country, and they have actually been denied entry. And those that even got there, they ended up being tortured. If you talk about the case of Boniface Mwangi having to be brought back in Kenya in the situation that he was. So it's perhaps the culmination of the very dark happenings that have been in Tanzania the past few months, running into years. And one wonders what exactly is the issue, because this is a country that has been led by one ruling party, the Chama cha Mapinduzi, which has existed since 1977. Of course, itself the product of some merger between the party that was ruling in Zanzibar and the party that was ruling in mainland Tanzania. So you'd imagine, you'd have expected that because of that unity, that history of, it's Chama cha Mapinduzi, Mapinduzi would be reforms, if you had to translate that, to an extent that now 48 years later we are not seeing reforms. We have seen candidates from the opposition parties, including Chadema, being barred from even participating in the election, and it's all elections, from presidential to parliamentary and council elections. then one wonders what exactly is this that is being conducted in Tanzania. And you've been hearing and reading statements from international organizations and bodies saying that what is happening in Tanzania is not a free and fair election. But then again, even as we report, we're reporting the bit of violence. It's also confusing because also fake news is emerging. Some AI-generated videos are emerging. So even as journalists, it's very difficult to verify what exactly is the truth. How can you be covering an election, but you're covering the side events? In this case, the protests. You're not even seeing the election itself. The results, how they're streaming in, who knows? Who is counting? Who is declaring? It's become very difficult to really follow this election.
Yeah, you raised a very important point, Gituko, because you expect during an election, you would see the counting of votes, you'll see some activity happening at polling station, you'll see announcements about results at the polling stations, but we're not really seeing that. And all we are seeing are those side shows. And you talk about how we're not getting any information from the media houses there. There are no official videos or clips that we're getting. I think it's only the BBC that's been able to have some footage and have reporters from in there. And we're having to rely on that or other international media to even get footage. But then now, as we talk about that, an announcement has just come in that in Zanzibar, where of course elections were also held, Daktari Hussein Ali Mwinyi has won. He's been re-elected as president. So Zanzibar has actually not witnessed the violence and the chaos that Tanzania has witnessed. So the elections are over. Results have been announced within 24 hours. Of course, it's a small island. Then the numbers of people are not very many. But then, Prof, if I come to you now, for some people, this was not expected. I know we've witnessed abductions in the past few months in Tanzania. We've witnessed the silencing of any opposition. We've witnessed abductions and, of course, people missing and not being seen again. And there have been murmurs, of course, on social media. But then the campaigns of Mama Samia have been massive and huge across the country with the full muscle of CCM. Did anyone really expect that it was going to blow up as it did yesterday?
If you are a keen observer of the Tanzanian situation, this is not news. And it's not over yet. I remember going to Tanzania, I think in 2015. I was invited by the government of the time of Jakaya Kikwete, but through the intellectual wing to debate the constitution. And as a Kenyan who was Tanzania-philia, who thought Tanzania is all, happiness, everybody is all harmony, no tribes, despite having 62 tribes, and no conflict, harmony, harmony, harmony. My imagination of Tanzania was shattered. And it was shattered because the debate was dominated by what were called the kero za muungano. Kero za muungano, and the grievances were aligned around that theme. The problems of Zanzibar, the problems of mainland, and the problems of the union, and we were trying to see what needed to be reformed in the constitution in order to foundation Tanzanians' democracy. Now, from that time of Jakaya Kikwete to now, we have seen a downward spiral of Tanzania's not just democracy, basically a country hurtling down to authoritarianism. We would not have talked about that, because who calls Lee Kuan Yew a dictator? Who calls Xi Jinping a dictator? Who calls many Asian, the Koreans, dictators? Nobody. Because if you deliver on development, then you buy yourself a license to be liked. Even so, you might be a despot. And you are even given prefixes like enlightened dictator or a benevolent dictator. But for Mama Suluhu, it's a double tragedy. Your country is hurtling down, in political terms towards authoritarianism, and your economy is also hurtling down. The people are becoming poorer, particularly after COVID-19. And yourself come to power thanks to COVID-19, which has also decimated your country. It's a paradox of all times. And when she came in, she was really received very well with her 4 R's reforms. You want to have reconciliation, you want to have resilience, you have to have reforms and restoration, or whatever it was. So the 4 R's were embraced even by the opposition. And she looked like a fresh air, a breath of fresh air back in Tanzania. But all of a sudden, she became a captive of the radicals in her party, who thought that giving in space to the opposition was basically undermining the Tanzanian's heritage. And that is how she ends up here. I don't think she will rule, she'll have peace after today, after the election. And I didn't think the way she went into election was the way to go. If she had good advisors, she would have known that it's good to call something what it is. If it's a spade, call it a spade. If it's a spoon, call it a spoon. She was not going into an election, and she knows this. She was going for a coronation. There was no contest, because if all your contestants are in jail, if the people you are having there are people who I don't even have any name of those who are supposed to be the opposition. The only thing I have is that Suruhu is fighting against Hassan, and is also fighting another person called Samia. So that's the risk we have. And it's ridiculous, isn't it?
It is, and it's become a meme all over about who her opponents are. Before we continue, I want us to listen to Rais Samia Suluhu after she voted yesterday, and then we'll continue the discussion.
Nataka niseme kwamba nami tayari nimeshakamilisha zoezi hili, na niwaombe wa Tanzania wale ambao bado wako nyumbani wajitokeze, waende wakafanye wakatimize haki yao, wakapige kura, chagua viongozi wanaowataka.
That was her yesterday after the elections, when things was after she voted, when things were still a bit calm. I'll come to you, Roland, because something Prof mentioned makes me ask the question about the abductions. He's talking about how opposition candidates, including Tundu Lissu, are in jail, and any voice of dissent was being silenced. If it's possible, I want us to listen to Deogracius Munishi, who's the International Secretary of Chadema Party, about the wave of abductions, and then we'll continue.
The wave of abduction in this month alone, the month of October, is horrifying. As I speak to you now, the data we have, 52 people have been abducted, and some of them we don't know their whereabouts, whether they have been killed or they are alive. In that situation, no one can feel safe.
Roland, is this one of the reasons why Mama Samia is facing the revolt that she is? Because, I mean, during Magufuli's time, there were abductions that happened, but this one seemed to be different.
Yes, it is different, very different in the sense that, as Deogracius says, nobody's spared. And when I mean nobody's spared, and I've said it before, and we document it in our report, unchecked, unopposed, unjust wave of terror spread in Tanzania ahead of the 2025 vote, is that from a TikToker, Shadrach Chaula, who seemed to have ridiculed the president in his TikTok post, arrested, sentenced with fine option. Tanzanians rally behind get the fine and get him out. He's abducted a few days later, missing to date. To an ambassador, Humphrey Polepole, abducted more than 3 weeks ago, missing to date. But also this ambassador, Humphrey Polepole, was a ruling party member. You know, you can imagine that you would want to think about this wave or spate of abductions targeting the real opposition parties. We have gone to a situation whereby the state authorities, the president perhaps, was targeting members of her own party. There is Gwajima, Bishop Gwajima, who controlled over 2,000 churches, or head over more than 2,000 churches, criticizes the president and her administration on his pulpits, and the next day, receives a letter More than the 2,000 churches are closed. Members want to congregate every Sunday to worship outside, the church, met with the full force of the law in terms of the police having, to violently disperse them, beatings and all that. You have a Reverend Kitima, a Catholic priest, beaten by unknown people a day after criticizing the state. But the wave of abductions is what drives everyone crazy, because how do people just disappear? The state does not even give any information out with regards to what it has done in as far as investigations, what are the whereabouts. Like in Kenya, to even tell us that they abducted themselves, but produce them and say, those images where this person appeared in a bush, in a thicket, looking all beaten, is fake and all that. But these people are missing. 11 documented by ourselves, 5 last year, 6 this year. Some of them big names, as I've said, Humphrey Polepole, Mduda Nyagali, are very big names. I think we saw this coming. And the worst thing is that states always punch holes on reports that human rights organizations produce. People punch holes saying that, these are, funded institutions that are just here, to try and, disparage, our records and all that. But again, we always know what we're saying, because, there is no need for a human rights organization to come up with a propaganda. The idea is let the human rights violation stop. Extrajudicial killing, a head or a senior member of an opposition party abducted in full daylight from a public service vehicle, found the next day, killed, and head drenched in acid. How would you expect a society to really go into the next election, really feeling safe? Beyond that, we have protests that are dispersed, not protests, assembly, and some of them peaceful assembly. Last year alone, we documented in a particular event in Mbeya, that is Western Tanzania, more than 500 members of Chama cha Demokrasia na Maendeleo, Chadema, arrested a day ahead of the International Youth Day. So how did that arrest of the 500 happen? It is not rounded up in a stadium or something like that. It is security forces placing themselves strategically along routes where the young people are going to Mbeya, and arresting them from public service vehicles and all that. So a state that had already started this kind of authoritarian practices really knew at some point that this is bottled up tension, and at some point it's going to explode. I think that's where Tanzania is right now.
Because you mentioned young people, and of course we'll talk about the space of technology in all this, but I want us to listen to some of the protesters speaking yesterday on election day, saying hakuna uchaguzi ulifanyika hapa.
Sisi tumezaliwa katika nchi hii, hatuna nchi nyingine. Kwa hiyo ni kwamba tunapenda uhuru wa maoni, tunapenda kuzuia utekaji, tunapenda uhuru wa vyombo vya habari.
Nisha kwamba ili tupate uhuru lazima tutumie nguvu, basi tutatumia.
Tunaandamana kwa sababu uchaguzi si wa haki. Sababu tuliokuwa tunawataka kwanza hawapo. Wameweka watu wao.
Sijapigwa, lakini nimepigishwa magoti na familia yangu pasipo na sababu, na kosa silijui, lakini nimejitetea nikiwa ndani. Jamani, hapa pana amani, kaambia toka nje. Na kama msipotoka nje tutawapigia mimoshi, mtoke na mabomu ya machozi.
Nini tupigwe risasi na wakati tunaandamana maandamano ya haki? Kwa nini tupigwe risasi? Kwa hicho kitu sisi tunapinga, na hii issue haiishi leo wala kesho, mpaka ikubalike.
There are reports that 2 people actually died since yesterday. But JB, if you look at the people speaking, other than the lady who talks about tear gas in her home, the rest were young people. So it makes me wonder, and even in the streets, in the shots that we are seeing of people protesting, most of them were young people. So do you think what happened in Kenya with the Gen Z protests, what the world saw in Nepal, what we recently saw in Madagascar, in Bangladesh, could it have in any way changiad or chochered what you're seeing in Tanzania because the young people standing up?
Most certainly, Jamila, because like Roland has brilliantly explained, most of this anger you see in the streets of Dar es Salaam and the rest of the towns in Tanzania are bottled up anger for years. And like Prof. Ali had mentioned that in their discussion, they could already see the telltale signs of all these things that Tanzania has pretended that they espouse, a culture of peace, a culture of democracy, and all that. But allow me to say, Jamila, that the events of yesterday and up to until today are nothing short of 1st of August 1982 in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And in this day and age, you don't really expect a state that pretends to be very democratic to do such. And I think this is a point where we really have to agree that Tanzanians must rewrite their political culture. Going to the streets, demanding for their rights, demanding for the freedoms, demanding that the media must be allowed to do its work without interference, are signs that maybe for the first time they are realizing that all these things that they've experienced have been a layer of deceit from the government and the ruling party. And then coming back to your question about whether the wave of the young people's protest across Kenya, Madagascar, Nepal, and all these places, Morocco the other day, it's simply an awareness that the young people look at the country's political history and they realize that it has been on chokehold by just one party. And this party has systems right to the villages that is denying them an opportunity to express themselves like the rest of their colleagues in other countries. And therefore their coming out is just a show of protest, one, and two, demanding for what is rightfully theirs. I think with all the accolades that she'd received initially, Mama Samia Suluhu has failed to provide solutions to these young people. And these create an environment that gives them that democratic space, that they're able to share their minds, their thoughts freely without being abducted or arrested arbitrarily. Two, the elections ought to have seen, because she was going to win anyway, but she could have made it look like a little bit of free and fair by allowing competitors like Tundu Lissu and the ACT Mzalendo candidate to run. Because using state machinery, it's obvious that they were going to do the machinations they are doing. So some semblance of a free and fair contest could have easily relaxed the tensions that we are seeing in Tanzania. But suffice to say, Tanzania is a tragicomedy, because what we see, what is presented to us, and you remember there are several instances where the president herself has chided Kenya based on our democratic space actions, the things that we do in this country, and she's always said jirani jirani anajua tu kizungu pekee. You see, so now that this is in her doorstep, I don't think she will sit pretty going forward. And two things might happen. One, she would be that undisputable dictatorial president, or she will relax, and this might not augur well with the cartels within the Chama cha Mapinduzi, and they might want to do something to relieve her of her positions, because what these people do is they want to control the country by any means necessary, and the environment does not allow it.
Sam, you know, we've admired how at some point here on this table talked about the structures of CCM, the way compared to our political parties and the fickleness of it all, and how our parties are multi-purpose vehicles for election system of this system where you know who's coming after this, who's going here next. They have this whole structure that works, but it seems it's not really working. It's not perfect.
I just checked that the M in CCM, Mapinduzi, actually means revolution. Not reforms, yeah? Now, 48 years later, I think the real revolution is going to happen in Tanzania, the Mapinduzi ukweli. And it's quite unfortunate because, of course, Tanzania was a single-party state for many years, up until 1992 when they adopted the multipartyism. and had their first election in 1995, being a multi-party election. Of course, we can debate here the quality of the multi-partyism that we've seen in Tanzania. But it's so unfortunate that because Kenya became a multi-party state in 1992, returned to that 1991. And the first election, and the first election was in 1992. So we are almost age mates when it comes to that. But to an extent that Kenya has actually continued to have multi-party elections, never mind the quality of those, but at least we had the major transition in the year 2002 when the ruling party fell and you had an opposition candidate ascending to the office. And Tanzania is yet to get to that point, to an extent that now even the opposition candidates are not being allowed to stand in elections. You recall what happened to the previous leader in previous elections. Remember me the name?
John Pombe Magufuli?
No, the former leader of Chadema.
Mbowe. There was Tundu Lissu and Mbowe.
Yes. So you've seen the sort of treatment or the mistreatment that we've seen on that front. But then again, even as you talk about the attempts to review the Constitution, if you have to look at the Constitution, the copy that I have, because I don't know which is the latest, Article 41 of the Constitution, Article 7, saying that when a candidate is declared by the Electoral Commission to have been duly elected in accordance with this article, then no court of law shall have any jurisdiction to inquire into the election of that candidate. I mean, how do you put that in a constitution? Knowing too well, how do you appoint the Electoral Commission? It is heavily dependent on the wishes of the ruling party and, of course, the government of the day. So it is likely that particular players, stakeholders, may be dissatisfied with the presidential election. When you put a requirement that once the commission declares an election, no court can have jurisdiction, and it has been settled by different institutions, including, I think, the African Court, saying that that constitution is a recipe for chaos and disorganization in that particular country. So I think here you're dealing with a country that has not been alive to the reality of the moment. And you've seen, even when Kenya was having its issues with the Gen Z demonstrations in 2024 and the anniversary in 2025, we've seen the Parliament of Tanzania standing up and calling us names, even when some members of parliament have said a few things, or Kenyans on the online platforms have said a few things about Tanzania. They have stood in that house and lectured Kenya and saying that Kenya is full of bad manners, that Kenyan youth are not listening to the older persons. But I think in this country we have been able to prove that it doesn't matter that if you're older, it means that you have the best interest of the citizens at heart. That has been proven, at least in Kenya. It cannot be because there's a general shift in the politics of different countries in the world. The young people want to be included. They want opportunities. They are going to school, yes, but they're not finding the job opportunities. If you're talking about the economies of the African countries, we have to talk about even the East African community, looking at the GDP of Kenya versus Tanzania versus Uganda and the other countries that are in the East African community, or in the East African region, you will see there are challenges of unemployment. That must be true even in Tanzania. You cannot continue to exclude them with a system that favors the elite, those that are in the ruling political party, knowing too well that education widens your view, your worldview. You want to have different ideas. You want to be listened to. You want to be at the table making those decisions. So I think Tanzania has consistently lost a great opportunity with the stability they enjoyed, despite the challenges that you now see, the underbelly that was. They have missed that opportunity to come together and realize, yes, we've lost the constitution in the year 2014, but what can be done? It is not being done. And I think it is not helping the situation that you find that country in, even as they moved towards the extent of, if they wish to restore democracy. If you have to look at the political party system in that country, from the extent of, in Kenya, you're talking about any person who wants to form a political party can create one, but there are certain thresholds that you must meet. I would imagine there are thresholds in Tanzania, but you've not seen a political party being deregistered in Kenya. It is actually possible in Tanzania. and the recourse is not available. In fact, if such a thing happens, like what happened to Chadema being barred from taking part in the election, you actually arrest the leaders and put them behind bars. You delay the trial, you charge them with treason, takes a long while, then you take breaks within the process. So you're not really delivering justice. And I think even as you look at the Constitution, which would have wanted to give the universal rights, human rights to every citizen in Tanzania, that's not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you talk about the underbelly and what can be done. Prof, I'll come to you on that, because there has to be a way out of this situation. There are several factors we were discussing that may have contributed to this, especially with President Samia Suluhu, because one, she wasn't elected. She became president after the death of John Pombe Magufuli. Two, she's Zanzibari. So there are those undertones also, because now you have two Zanzibaris, one in Zanzibar, Dr. Mwinyi, and her on this other end. And three, you talk about how in the beginning she was okay. Some of her policies seemed to be welcomed. But then CCM and the groups or the individuals behind it may have given her wrong advice. So what do they need to do to rectify the situation? And does this really affect CCM as a party in terms of this unity and this strong force that it's been seen to be for a long time? Yeah.
You're right. The question you have asked is quite legitimate and really begs for answers that explain the depth and the width of the problem that Tanzania finds itself in. I'll go back to the Kero za Muungano.
No.
Because how did Tanzania come about, and did Nyerere give too much? So the power sharing between the islands and the mainland has itself been a problem.
Yeah.
Because the islands have always wanted to maintain their autonomy. And the mainland has always wanted to have the islands with them, at least the elite of the mainland. So Tanganyika produces a president and a deputy president. And Zanzibar produces a president and a deputy president in alternate, so that we have two vice president or deputy president and one president. So if the president comes from Zanzibar, then the second vice president will come from the mainland. And that's how Suluhu got to power, because the president was a mainlander and the deputy, therefore, was from Zanzibar. Now, the mainlander did not finish his term. He passed on, and she inherited. And therefore, the CCM internally became divided on whether she should run for a second term, the fairness of the balance of power between the islands and the mainland. And there are some who thought, well, this is a member of the party. It's not about Zanzibar or mainland. This is a member of CCM. There are others who say, no, this is based on unity. And therefore, as we now cast, or turn the spotlight on the atrocities towards the opposition, locking them in and being unable to present a candidate or even to campaign, the real problem is within CCM itself. And CCM, for the first time, is deeply divided ideologically inside. This may not come to surface, but what you're calling abductions, and Ronald has mentioned that here, the main abductions are actually not targeted to the opposition. They are targeted to rebel members of the party,
CCM, yeah.
The CCM itself. And therefore, if it was a normal situation, CCM would have gathered very quickly and gotten control of the situation. But now it can't, because it is also divided within itself. You've seen, some of the statements that are coming from the military, some of the rebel members of the military and others. And that tells you that it is deeply divided.
Yeah.
At the same time, Suluhu herself is a Zanzibari fighting for the presidency of Tanganyika. And in Zanzibar, they have a president who was announced as a winner, Dr. Mwinyi. Now, so there are two Zanzibaris, so who are presidents of the country. And the mainlanders have always complained that the islands are privileged. And two, they are enjoying so much autonomy and so much kind of rights in economic terms. For example, they can import some commodities duty-free. Yeah. When you are, as a mainlander, you cannot. So that you can actually be doing business between the island and the mainland on the basis of what has been taxed and what has not been taxed. Yeah. And this has not eluded Tanzania's intellectuals who have debated it openly. A privileged island in order to be part and parcel of the union. And this is now coming to a head. And I don't know how they are going to resolve it, whether it's going the Nepal way or Madagascar way, because that's a possible scenario, or CCM will go back to the Nyerere culture. Because part of why Tanzania finds itself where it is finding itself is that Mwalimu used to say that we need to have a talk. And he had a platform where they would debate issues, the most difficult issues. Mwalimu would bring them to the debate, and he would be one of the debaters with the intellectuals. And they allowed their intellectuals to the point that we envied themselves as Kenyans, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s. There was no doubt, I mean, Tanzania was a model for any Pan-Africanist anywhere on the continent. Now, those two countries, Tanzania and Senegal, because Nyerere allowed debate, and he financed the platform where these debates occurred. And it is these debates that produced Museveni, I mean the Aria Museveni, not the latter one, because they were part and parcel of the debaters in those forums. Now, progressively, Nyerere's successors, particularly after Mkapa, has crossed down that space. And there's no space now for debate in Tanzania. And that's why Tundu Lissu and the other opposition leaders find themselves behind bar. It's basically to cut down on that. And Mama Suluhu is not likely to be the one to bring the country back to the debating, to the old, we talk and talk until we agree, that Nyererian philosophy. So how then do we cast the future of this country? First, it is to accept, particularly for us who have been Tanzania-philia, that the kind of utopian Tanzania we created for ourselves is not real. The myth, the mask is peeling off. Two, that the East African community need to get back to the drawing board and begin to assert the principles. But who is going to do that when the three heads of state in the region, and this must be said openly, without fear, have decided to regionalize authoritarianism? Yeah. So and the only custodians we have of this democracy now within the region is civil society and the intelligentsia in the region, basically in Kenya. These are the people who are now the island of democracy in a turbulence of hurtling authoritarianism.
In fact, we're going to listen to the civil society shortly, but first, we said that earlier there's an announcement that Dr. Hussein Ali Mwinyi has won the elections in Zanzibar, has been re-elected. Let's listen to the announcement.
Na Mheshimiwa Dr. Hussein Ali Mwinyi amepata kura 448,892 sawa na 74.8%. Tume ya Uchaguzi wa Zanzibar imethibitisha matokeo yote ya wagombea na imeridhika nayo. Hivyo kwa kufuata masharti ya kifungu cha 96 kifungu kidogo cha pili na cha 3 cha sheria ya uchaguzi ya Zanzibar ya mwaka 2018 na kwa kuzingatia mfumo wa uchaguzi unaotumika katika kumpata mshindi wa kiti cha rais wa Zanzibar, natamka na kumtangaza rasmi Mheshimiwa Dr. Hussein Ali Mwinyi kwamba amechaguliwa kihalali na wananchi wa Zanzibar kuwa rais wa Zanzibar na mwenyekiti wa Baraza la Mapinduzi.
74.8%, just to remind of, yes.
That's fine.
Constitutionally. CCM, no, kuna challenge.
Waiting for swearing in.
Was there any doubt? And because, Prof, you talk about very important things about what's happening in the region. Debates are not being allowed. It's just not in Tanzania. You talk about how the civil society maybe is the only standing voice. Let's listen to what our civil society members have been saying about what's happening in Tanzania, and then we'll come to you, Roland.
Tunataka serikali ya Tanzania ikome mara moja kutumia vikosi vya usalama kunyamazisha, kugandamiza na kuwaua Watanzania. Ya tatu, tunasema kwamba lazima kuwe na uchunguzi wa wazi kwa yale maovu yaliyotendwa pamoja na mauaji na mengineo.
It is time for the African Union to serve the people of Africa, to stop being a club of leaders clinging to power, and to redirect its energies to helping citizens of Africa.
Immediate restoration of internet access and all communication channels to allow citizens, journalists, and human rights defenders to freely share information. 2, immediate cessation of violence by Tanzanian security forces against unarmed civilians and unconditional release of all detained protesters and political prisoners.
You know, Njeri could be talking about any of the 3 East African countries, the way she's speaking. Because she's talking about matumizi mabaya ya mamlaka, she's talking about releasing of all the prisoners, because that's happening in Tanzania, it's happening in Kenya, it's happening in Uganda. Uganda is going for elections early next year. We have Bob Njagi and Oyo who are missing. We have Bobby Wine and any of those who are opposition candidates being given a difficult time. I think he was under house arrest a few days ago. Meetings zake hazifanyiki. It's just, I think, bad manners on the part of our governments in East Africa, Roland.
Yes, and it is spreading. In South Sudan, we also have the leader of opposition in prison, not just Uganda and Tanzania. And now we are worried Kenya. 2025 is elections in Tanzania. 2026 is elections in Uganda. The trend is the same. 2027 is elections in Kenya. In all the 3 East African countries, we've had abductions that have targeted a member of the other country. In Kenya, we had Kiza Besigye abducted rendition to Uganda. We had Maria Sehai Sarungi abducted, almost also renditioned. In Uganda, we cannot talk, more about the case of Boniface Mwangi and Agatha Tuhairi, a Ugandan and a Kenyan. In Uganda, we are seeing the Oyo and Bob Njagi. And as you say, and as Prof has said, there is a lot that Kenyans have to offer in as far as leadership to restore some of this, we say, civic space, or even fight the clawback as far as how the states want to, continue these authoritarian practices. And I like what Hussein Khalid is doing, what Njeri are actually speaking about, and Martha Karua, because we are the ones that can speak right now. And civil society organizations in Tanzania, mostly the ones who are there after the internet switched down, are telling us, your voice really counts in this kind of situation. And I think it does. The Gen Z protests, or the finance bill protest last year, offered a way again to let citizens of East Africa to know that, power is in their hands. Because as leaders unite, as you say, the learning of bad manners at the top there, they are uniting, I'm sure, calling each other. That is why an abduction will happen in Uganda of Kenyans, but you will not hear much of the state, really saying what it is doing to ensure that these Kenyans are coming back home. The same way that an abduction would happen in Tanzania, and you don't, hear so much of Kenyans really saying that, that is our citizen. No matter what they've done, no matter what, criminal act that are being accused of, either bring them home or take them to a court of law, charge them, and we continue from there. Yeah. So I think we, especially civil society organizations, have got a big role to play in terms of, defending our rights, and especially around this time where world over, by the way, we have this clampdown of democratic values. I am not impressed to learn that on this, news gang, you guys decided that CCM was actually a very admirable and dependable party, because, the news has been on the wall.
Yeah.
The information has been there, during Magufuli time. We knew, especially, I think 2020, CCM won 99%
of the votes.
Won in quotes of the votes. In terms of parliamentary seats, you have a party that has got everyone. You enter, everyone is CCM. Before then, we've had instances whereby CCM was another arm of the state. Tanzanians joke that there was a time when, when faced with domestic issues or faced with small crime issues, you'd rather go report to a CCM office than go even report to the police or, to government authority, because CCM has been authority. But again, my worry right now for Tanzania is that it is the only united republic that we have in Africa. We have Nigeria, you have South Sudan that has got states, but it's not as unique as how Tanzania is. Tanzania has got 2 states in one country.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful show that if not really maintained, if there is no proper rule of law, if there is no proper, democratic values, if we have these authoritarian practices continue, then this is going to break what we have counted as, the peace, of the region. And as we say, it was actually a peace that was actually really, managed. If we lose that, then we are losing a very important, part of us. And just maybe going back to Prof, just like Museveni, there was an earlier version of Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan.
It was very short-lived.
It was short-lived, but there was that earlier version when everybody was Mama.
Yeah.
When everybody was like, she's reversed every, regressive policies that the late Magufuli had put.
Yeah.
And I wish that was the version that, she
was on the ballot.
Yeah.
Then would be talking about progress going forward.
Yeah, we are about to take a break, and I was thinking maybe we can give Prof the final word on this topic before we let you go.
I think the challenge that we face with Tanzania now, if you ask them what is ailing them, they will tell you that it's a Kenyan disease. They are catching the Kenyan flu. Because we are now identified the Gen Z. We are the ones who got post-election violence and so on. And Tanzania had taken a very patronizing position on Kenya. They literally have been the ones brokering our post-election crisis. And our leaders have been basically looking to them to come. You remember the 2008, it was Jakaya, even the shaping of what we have today as a government. The power sharing arrangement is trying to mirror Tanzania. And our internal debate about our future, about having a prime minister, 2 presidents or 2 deputy presidents and so on, we are still revolving around the Tanzanian model of thing. And the big question is, what is Tanzania itself going to do? It's a huge challenge for us. Yeah. But for the East African community, I would have wished that Veronica Duva issued a statement at this time as the Secretary General, because we need to spell the values upon which we are founded as an East African community. Because it appears now its authoritarianism is the norm. At least at the level of government and leadership. If you look at what is happening in Uganda, what is happening in Tanzania, and what is happening here in Kenya, as Ronald has put it, there is consensus around this shared value of authoritarianism. Is that really our shared value? Is that why we came together as the East African community? 2, Tanzania has to decide where it belongs. Is it a southern state or is it an East African state?
Is it in SADC or is it...
it has to decide, because it is too much into SADC, and it is bringing the bad manners of the old parties of the Southern Africa into Eastern Africa. East Africa, we have moved. Uganda has new parties. Kenya has new parties. Now, this idea of the parties that you find in that region and their authoritarianism and their national fundamentalism, that one may not work here. So it's a watershed we have here.
It's a watershed. Sam, you will like 2 seconds.
Yeah. So the challenge I find, I think everything stems from the structure of their constitution. Article 17 of the Constitution of Tanzania says that every citizen of the United Republic has the right to freedom of movement in the United Republic and the right to live in any part of the United Republic, to live and enter the country, and the right not to be forced to leave or be expelled from the United Republic. But then again, they add a rider that any lawful act or any law which is intended to curtail a person's freedom of movement and restrain or imprison him, or limit a person from exercising his freedom of movement so as to execute a judgment or court order, or compel a person first to comply with any obligations arising under another law, or protect public interest in general, or preserve certain special interest or interests of a certain section of the public, such act or law shall not be construed or be held to be repugnant to or inconsistent with the provisions of this article. So you provide a right in the Constitution, but you use the same article to go against it.
Yeah.
I think they have to check this, because you cannot give a right and you take it away at the same time. And you're saying, because when you say that such act or law, or you're saying any lawful act, who determines that an act is lawful? Yeah. In Kenya, that would have to be taken to the court of law. Yeah. In this case, the High Court, to test the action in regards to the rights and freedoms that are enshrined in the Constitution. They have so much work to do with their law, the Constitution.
I think for me, it would be the question of who arbitrates. Like Prof says, Tanzania has always been the arbitrator here. And the place of the international community in this. And perhaps a question to Roland and Prof, and they might want to answer it after the show, is does Tanzania yield to international pressure? Because Kenya does. And Kenya is seen as a very big democracy. Can Tanzania yield to international pressure and behave properly?
Prof, you want to answer that now?
Tanzania has a problem with that in terms of it is not used to being intervened. In fact, it's the one that has intervened and has always had a moral high ground. Remember, it intervened in Uganda militarily, the first African country to invade another country with a moral crowd. And they have intervened in Kenya in 2008 to quell the conflict between Kibaki and Raila Odinga. And now, Kenya is not in a position to intervene, because the values that Mama Suluhu is trying to fight for are the ones that we are fighting for here. So Tanzania finds itself, without an intervener. And America was a big intervener with the morals. Then now in America, we have another one.
but they still listen. They still do listen. I remember Magufuli came with this policy of pregnant schoolgirls, or girls who fall pregnant while in school cannot go back to, to school, to the mainstream schools. And civil society organizations in Tanzania came together and called on the World Bank to follow one of its own policy against discrimination and withhold a 500 million, loan grant for education. And the World Bank actually, withheld. And a few months later, when Suluhu became president, that is one of the policies that had, to be reversed. Because at the end of the day, there is that one voice, and when that voice pulls off something, then you react. So maybe somehow, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Roland Ebola, Regional Researcher, East Africa at Amnesty International. Professor Peter Kagwanja, who's the CEO of Africa Policy Institute, for being with us and giving us your insights. Of course, we want peace in Tanzania. They are our next door neighbors. Already we're seeing at the border in Namanga, Kenyans wanted to cross over to go there and protest. We want peace and stability in the region. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
We're taking a short break. We'll be back. We want to talk about the Kenyan politics. Stay tuned. This is The News Guy.
We know times are tough, so save money by buying airtime from M-Pesa to any network with zero transaction fees. Dial *487*2# and get your airtime PAP with zero transaction costs.
It's big, bigger than you can imagine.
Welcome back and thank you for watching the News Gang. Now we are coming back to our own Kenyan politics. That was the president speaking today. He is campaigning for the UDA candidate in Malava. He wasn't the only one doing that today. There was quite some activity in Malava. But JB, he says something very, very interesting, that I don't think I have any strong opposition left since the passing of Raila Amolo Odinga. Ako sawa tu.
It is interesting. That's politics, because you must always posture and position yourself. And that is what William Ruto is effectively doing in Malava. But allow me to say, Jamila, that the by-elections would be the precursor to 2027. That the pace at which we're going to see politics and politicians change in 2026 will be determined by the outcome of the 27th of November by-elections, either in Magarini, Banisa, Malava, Kasipul, and all the other places, simply because it would be the first time we are seeing the test for the united opposition and how they maneuver their candidates in these polls. And again, for President William Ruto, it would be a test for his UDA or Kenya Kwanza team and the newfound arrangement with ODM in these polls. Because you remember about early this month, or maybe, I think it was on the 12th of the 13th of October, while in Siaya, the Deputy President Kithure Kindiki said, as Kenya Kwanza administration, they're going to support the ODM candidates in Ugunja and in Ugenya and Kasipul. Obviously saying that they're in this thing as a team. You see the Kakamega Governor Fernandez Baraza actively leading campaigns for the UDA candidate in Malava. So this is going to be a test of these two formations. And if the united opposition tastes blood, then William Ruto has got everything to be worried about in these by-elections, simply because this will offer direction to 2027. And therefore, that is why you saw William Ruto in Baringo. Must have been either the other day or yesterday.
He was there yesterday.
And today he was in Malava actively campaigning for a UDA candidate, because the tests of these by-elections are likely to be a reflection of what is going to happen in 2027. And therefore, he is out there campaigning, and I don't think he stops until August of 2027. And we will see a number of things happening in this space. He would want to quote ODM more actively during this time and up to 2027, simply because the super cover that he had in ODM in the name of Raila Amolo Odinga is no longer there. And therefore, ODM now has got various talking heads that he'd want to come down, so that there's a direction that this is where ODM is. So he has to handle the by-elections and also handle ODM. So we are going to see an active William Ruto going forward, managing the by-elections and also trying to ensure that ODM that offers him that super cover stays in line and stays in check within the broad-based arrangement.
You raise a very good point, JB, because the president, as you said, he was in Baringo, he's in Malava, he's campaigning and also promising goodies.
Exactly.
There was, I think, a university somewhere, some other projects being mentioned there, those goodies were being promised. And you talk about ODM, and yesterday, I think it was yesterday, that there was an interesting soundbite by Kisii Governor Simba Arati, who's an ODM official, when he said, well, if William Ruto wants the ODM ticket, he has to go at it with everyone else. Aende huko atafute tikiti, which means him running on an ODM ticket is a possibility. But let's listen to ODM Secretary General Sifuna speaking about ODM in the broad-based, just after a meeting of the party.
We reiterate the commitment of the party to the broad-based government until 2027, a relationship guided by the 10-point agenda entered into for the sake of peace and stability of the country.
Sam, we're going to see very interesting things very soon.
Yeah, and I know very many people, when they listened to Secretary General Edwin Sifuna make that statement, they wondered if it's the same person they saw at the funeral of Raila Odinga on the 19th of October 2025. But you recall that he has consistently said that he's the Secretary General, and when he's asked to read a statement, he's going to read the statement, whatever the content may be. And he has used some very interesting examples. I understand that during that press conference, there are journalists that wanted to raise questions after the statement, and immediately he finished, he said, no questions for today, because he knows what people are going to ask. You recall that it was the very first meeting since that funeral, and if the funeral sentiments are anything to go by, then you'll know that ODM was not a very peaceful affair on the day Raila Odinga was laid to rest. But now coming in on Monday to have that meeting in Nairobi and thereafter releasing that statement, I see that as an attempt by the new party leader in Dr. Oburu Oginga to at least bring everyone to order, have a common voice that can stand and can sustain them for the coming few weeks. Of course, you've seen them saying that they're going on with their plans to celebrate the 20 years of ODM, holding different meetings. There has been calls. I think it's Simbarati was inviting former affiliates from Uhuru Kenyatta to Kalonzo Musyoka and William Ruto to come back to the fold of ODM party. Even him saying that come 2027 they'll have a candidate and they are ready to welcome, including William Ruto, to come and contest for the ticket with other contestants that may want, or other aspirants that may want to be president of Kenya. So I look at it as an opportunity that the ODM party has taken, knowing how deeply divided they are, to at least buy themselves time to mourn the passing of Raila Odinga, but at the same time to see the tension that was to sort of cool down, and perhaps in the coming weeks and months you'll see them making a bolder statement opposition moving forward. At the same time, you're seeing other political parties, they're strategizing. Yeah. They're coming together and deciding on where do they go. Just today we saw the Jubilee Party meeting and designating Fred Matiang'i as one of the deputy party leaders.
Maybe Sam, we can listen to that soundbite of Jeremiah Kioni talking.
Sure.
Yeah.
We have also resolved that Dr. Matiang'i represents us at the United Opposition, and on top of that, we also received formally his application to be the presidential candidate or Jubilee presidential candidate, and the NEC approved, resolved that he now carries the flag of Jubilee Party as our presidential candidate. And even as he goes to the United Opposition, he goes there in that capacity, and also representing our party leader, or deputizing our party leader, and actually being the face of our party going forward.
Right, so that's the Secretary General. Of course, I think for him it's a dream come true. Remember, he was one of the earliest to say that Jubilee Party wants Fred Matiang'i to be its presidential candidate. So that has happened. Of course, that meeting was chaired by the former president and party leader of Jubilee, that is Uhuru Kenyatta. But so when you see this, at the same time, for the very first time, we see the Jubilee Party acknowledging the existence of the United Opposition, however loose that establishment is. Of course, when we've spoken to to the other leaders previously, they have always said that we're working on understanding each other. Kalonzo Musyoka said that they're getting to know each other so that they can come together and form a structure, a vehicle that takes them to the next level. The next big question will be, how do they now come together to form a team that can actually pick a presidential candidate, a running mate perhaps, and eventually candidates for the rest of the seats, because you have 6 elections on one day. At the same time, when you listen to the president sort of mocking them and telling them that I do not see anybody, if it's those ones, I'll be done with this election by the morning of the election. So really, I see that as an opportunity that the president is taking to sort of whet the appetite of the people, telling them that even as you see them, because he's actually not referring to them by name. He's talking about Wakabila, those people without a plan. They cannot even tell you what road they're going to construct and what they're going to do with it. So he's, as JB says, he's posturing. But then it is up to the united opposition to decide how do they approach that election, because we're two years away. You look at the president and his entourage, they are busy saying that it's not yet time for politicking. It is time for us to deliver. We have a manifesto, we have work to do, we have projects to implement and to unveil. But at the same time, he's politicking. So does the united opposition have an opportunity to unveil projects? Of course they don't. They don't have power of the purse. They don't have any ministers. They do not have any officers that they can call to ask them to implement whatever that it is. But I think it is too early for anyone to start cutting their cloth. We are yet to see so much. Of course, the reorganization of the political space will see so much. There are people who currently are singing a certain song. They will drop it as we get closer to the date of the election. But I think at the same time, we must not lose, as Kenyans, we must not lose the visibility, we must not lose the sight of what is important, because at the moment, you have 416 members of parliament. Of course, as soon as you have the by-elections that are replacing those that have passed on or those seats that have become vacant, we have 1,450 members of the county assemblies. They have work to do. 47 governors, 1 president, 1 deputy president, and you have cabinet secretaries. They have work to do. They have resources they're implementing. They have budgets they're implementing. There are questions that they must respond. There's a question of accountability, because at the moment they have the power of the past. They have the power to run the executive or different terms of government that we have in the country. So really, it is up to Kenyans, even as you watch the political game, what is your right, and how do you ensure that those that are in office are kept accountable for whatever they're implementing. So I think it's going to be an interesting few months. We're still, is it about 22 or so months to the election? So much that we haven't seen.
Yeah, because you talk about the people and what their voice is in all this. And we've mentioned here how the way the politics in Kenya is, it's the leaders, the politicians who decide for us which direction we will go. Sometimes it's not really up to us, it's not our choice. And it's not like everything in this country is going on perfectly well. We are having a lot of problems in the education sector, in the health sector, with the economy, with people's ability to just be able to earn a living. So the politicking that we're seeing now is intensifying because of the by-elections, but then it will intensify more, especially next year as we come closer to elections. Bonya, any final words before we finish?
I think 2 things. One is for ODM, like some rightfully says, they're taking some time. I think this is the time they're trying to steady the ship, and they'll do this. And chances are after the ODM at 20 celebrations, then we might see very pertinent voices emerge from the party leadership and just trying to offer direction going forward. On the part of the president, he's out already, and I don't think he will be found in State House anytime soon, because remember, he had also promised that he would be heading to Kambani in 2 weeks, which is at the end of this week. The 2 weeks since Mashujaa are done, he moves to Kambani. So I think anybody who has appointment with him at State House, Nairobi, in the coming days, tricky sana.
How interesting politics is and life is in general. Thank you, JB. Thank you, Sam. We are about to finish. Time for the final words. I think Bonyo tuanze na wewe leo.
Mutanitupia vimoshi moshi.
Uko na ruksa.
Niko na uhuru wa kutoa suluhu.
Wow.
Tonight, I pick a bone with Nyaribari Chache MP Zahir Janda. This week, the honorable member burst onto social media with what he trumpeted as a brilliant legislative idea. Perhaps this was going to be his first real legislative spark since taking oath 3 years ago. His grand plan is to introduce a law regulating social media influencers. Yes, while hospitals struggle, youth remain jobless, and farmers are crying out, while corruption blooms in this country. However, for Mr. Janda, burning national priority is TikTokers and content creators. Honorable Janda says he wants to borrow from China, where influencers must provide credentials before discussing serious matters like finance, health, or law. On face value, The Chinese rule attempts to curb misinformation, ensure that intention has merit in its context. But Zahir, is this really the best thing you could borrow from China? From a global superpower with unmatched economic discipline, industrial productivity, and ruthless efficiency in punishing corruption, you chose influencer policing. China has laws that jail officials for stealing public funds, laws that seize properties bought with corruption money, laws that send economic saboteurs straight to prison, no press conferences, no committee dramas. And meanwhile, in Kenya, an MP wants to police ring lights and hashtags before policing looters and thieves. If we were to borrow something from China, let's borrow the courage to fight economic crime, not to gag the gig economy, where thousands of Kenyan youths have found opportunity because government jobs and leadership have failed them. And if credentials are the bar, let's ask the obvious. Mr. Janda, are you willing to introduce the same degree requirement for members of parliament, your colleagues, to improve on legislative quality? Or does seriousness only apply to influencers, not to lawmakers who routinely mislead the public from the floor of the same house you sit in? But let's be honest, influencers are not the biggest problem facing your Nyaribari Chache constituents. Bad roads, hospitals that are, but only by brick and mortar, unsustainable agriculture, youth unemployment, and basic services are the real issues that your constituents are grappling with. Legislation is not a vanity exercise, and it is not a theater. It must not be a distraction for social miscalculations. It must serve the nation, not silence its most creative young voices or punish those who have found a way to thrive outside state patronage. Honorable Janda, step back from social media policing and step into serious legislative work. Meet your constituents and understand their issues. Debate bills in parliament and hold the executive to account. If you must borrow from China, then please borrow the anti-corruption backbone. That is what Kenya needs. We don't need influencer licenses. Rather, we need leadership from those in elective positions, right priorities and seriousness. That is my bond tonight.
Now, on Wednesday, 29th October, the Salaries and Remuneration Commission unveiled its strategic framework for the period 2025.